On a December morning in 1959, in the quiet Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, a teenage girl staggered out of a hillside mansion. She was wearing a nightgown, and that nightgown was soaked in blood. She was screaming. Neighbors rushed toward the sound. The police were called. Inside the elegant home, an entire family had been destroyed in a single night. The person responsible was not a stranger, not a fugitive, not an intruder. It was the man who owned the house, a respected cardiologist, a man no one ever suspected. After that night, the house was never lived in again, but it was never cleared out either. The Christmas tree still stood in the living room. The presents remained beneath it, forever unopened, and on the kitchen wall, the calendar stopped permanently at December 1959. Some say time stopped inside that house. Not in a supernatural sense, but in the way the most traumatic memories refuse to move on. They stay. This house does not forget. It remembers. What could drive a respected man to turn against his own family, and what was unfolding behind closed doors long before that terrible night? If you want to understand how a home can become a time capsule of tragedy, stay with us. Like and subscribe for stories history never tells you directly, because to understand what happened inside this house, we have to go back to the man who built it. Harold Perelson was born in 1908 into an immigrant family in the United States, at a time when America itself was still defining its place in the world. His family was not wealthy. They came with a belief that was deeply rooted in the early 20th century, that hard work, discipline, and sacrifice would eventually be rewarded by American society. From an early age, Harold showed signs of being different. While many children his age spent their time in the streets, Harold spent long hours with books, not because he was forced to, but because he wanted something more. He did not want the life his parents had lived. He wanted respect, status, a name that carried weight in American society. In the early 20th century, medicine was more than a profession. It was power. Doctors held the lives of others in their hands. They were trusted almost without question and compensated far beyond the average citizen. For Harold Perelson, choosing medicine was not simply a career decision. It was a reinvention, a way to become someone entirely new. He pursued medical training with discipline and an ambition he never tried to hide. Records describe him as a serious student, socially reserved, devoting nearly all of his time to his studies. He chose cardiology, a field that was rapidly advancing as new discoveries began to reshape how people understood the human heart, life expectancy, and death itself. By the 1940s and early 1950s, Harold Perelson was practicing as a cardiologist in Los Angeles. At the time, Los Angeles was experiencing explosive growth, economically, culturally, symbolically. It was becoming the new frontier of the American dream. A specialist physician in Los Angeles during this period did not merely live comfortably. They lived exceptionally well, but Harold did not limit himself to the examination room. He understood something many physicians did not. Knowledge could be packaged, and when sold correctly, knowledge created power far beyond the walls of a clinic. In the 1950s, Harold began publishing medical textbooks. These were not popular science books. They were professional references used for medical training and study. The royalties provided a steady stream of income, in some years surpassing what he earned through clinical practice alone. To put this in perspective, during the 1950s, the average American household earned only a few $1,000s per year. A successful medical specialist in Los Angeles could earn several times that amount. Harold Perelson belonged to that group. Money, reputation, and social status began to converge. Harold was no longer just a doctor. He became a symbol, an immigrant who had mastered the system through intellect and discipline. He married, had children, built a family that, from the outside, appeared nearly flawless. To the world around him, Harold Perelson embodied a fully realized American dream. But this is where the story begins to turn. Because when a man climbs high enough, the question is no longer how to succeed. It becomes how to avoid falling. And once money, reputation, and social standing are secured, what truly begins to govern the decisions a man makes next? That is the question we now have to answer. Harold Perelson did not build his life alone. As he entered adulthood and secured his place within the medical profession, he married Lillian Perelson. Lillian entered Harold's life as an essential part of the image he was constructing. She was a devoted wife, a dedicated mother, and from the outside, she fit perfectly into the role expected of the spouse of a successful physician in mid-20th century Los Angeles. They had 3 children, a family of 5, matching the ideal post-war American model of upper-middle-class life. The father as provider, the mother as caretaker, the children growing up within stability, safety, and material comfort. To neighbors and colleagues, the Perelson family did not stand out because of scandal. They stood out because of order. A kind of order that suggested everything had been placed exactly where it belonged. But Harold understood something clearly. Reputation and wealth required a physical symbol to become permanent. In 1951, Harold Perelson purchased the house at 2301 Glendower Place in Los Feliz, Los Angeles. At the time, Los Feliz was one of the city's most desirable neighborhoods, bordering Griffith Park and overlooking a rapidly expanding urban landscape. The house had been built in 1925 in the Spanish Revival style, an architectural language closely associated with California's wealthy elite in the early 20th century. High arched doorways, thick stucco walls, large windows designed to capture the Southern California light. The mansion spanned 3 stories and more than 5,000 square feet. To put that into perspective, in today's Los Angeles market, a property of this size and location would be valued in the multi-million-dollar range based on land and placement alone. Even in the early 1950s, it represented a level of wealth far beyond the reach of most city residents. The interior reinforced that message. A spacious living room with high ceilings, a grand staircase leading to the bedrooms above. Every detail was chosen to communicate a single idea: success. For Harold Perelson, the house was not merely a residence for his family. It was a declaration that he had crossed the boundary of immigrant status, that he had entered the ranks of social power, that he had conquered a system not originally designed for people like him. The Perelson family moved into the house and began a life that, on the surface, showed no signs of instability. Shared meals, carefully prepared holidays, children growing up within a carefully protected environment. But within these walls, something important was taking shape. Harold's identity was becoming inseparable from the house itself, from the image it projected. from what others saw when they stood before the gates on Glendower Place. And when success ceases to be something achieved and becomes something that must be defended at all costs, the story begins to enter a different phase. What happens when the very thing that defines a man's worth becomes impossible to let go, even as it begins to tremble? By the late 1950s, the perfect image of the Perelson family began to show its first cracks. Not loudly, not dramatically, just small shifts unfolding in silence. The medical publishing industry was entering a period of transition. Older textbooks were being replaced. Competition among publishers intensified. The income stream that had once provided Harold Perelson with stability began to shrink. Royalty payments no longer arrived with the same regularity. Cash flow slowed, but expenses did not. The house on Glendower Place still had to be maintained. The family continued to live the life of a successful physician in Los Angeles. Harold Perelson faced a choice: adjust his life to a new financial reality, or preserve everything as it was, and hope stability would return on its own. He chose the second path. Debts began to appear, not the kind that outsiders would immediately notice, but numbers hidden in ledgers, in paperwork, in financial decisions Harold shared with no one in his household. He told nothing to Lillian, nothing to the children. The house remained brightly lit each evening. Meals were still prepared. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Inside, pressure was building. People who knew Harold during this period later recalled that he slept less, stayed awake deeper into the night, walked through the house at hours when everyone else was asleep. His weight dropped. His temperament grew unpredictable. The strain began to surface in small ways. Sharp remarks, sudden bursts of irritation without clear cause, long silences at the family table. Harold withdrew. He spent more time alone in his study. The door closed. Conversations shortened, then disappeared. At the same time, his thinking began to shift. Harold spoke more frequently about death, not as a physician discussing mortality, but as someone preoccupied with the fragility of everything he was trying to hold together. There were signs of growing suspicion, that others were working against him, that colleagues could not be trusted, that what he had built was under threat from unseen forces. Lillian sensed the instability. She urged her husband to seek help, but Harold refused. He was a doctor. He believed he understood the human body and mind better than anyone. Instead of seeking assistance, Harold appeared to turn toward medication, drugs that, at the time, were far less regulated than they are today. Self-medicating, particularly within the medical profession of the mid-20th century, was not uncommon. No one in the house realized where these small decisions were leading. No one could say when the pressure crossed its breaking point. But one thing was clear. The trajectory of Harold Perelson's life had begun to bend. And when a system built on control starts to lose that control, an explosion becomes only a matter of time. The question is, when pressure exceeds its limits, when does the breaking point finally arrive? December 5th, 1959, was an ordinary weekend day at the house on Glendower Place. There were no warning signs, no major arguments, no raised voices. That evening, the Perelson family sat down to dinner together, as they had many times before. Lillian prepared the meal. The children took their seats. Harold was present, but he barely ate. He sat there, staring at his plate, his mind clearly elsewhere. Those in the room could sense something unusual in the silence, but no one understood what it meant. After dinner, the children left the table. Lillian cleaned the kitchen. Harold said he needed to do more work in his study. It was a familiar explanation. No one objected. No one questioned it. As night fell, the lights in the house went out, one by one. The family drifted into sleep. Only Harold Perelson remained awake, alone with thoughts no one else could see. Sometime after midnight, Harold left his study. He went down to the garage. There, he picked up a hammer, a heavy tool normally used for repairs, not for killing. Harold climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was silent. Bedroom doors were closed. In the master bedroom, Lillian was asleep. There was no indication that she realized what was happening. The attack occurred while she lay in bed. Lillian Perelson died there. Harold then left the master bedroom and walked to the room of his eldest daughter, Judy. Judy awoke to see her father standing before her. Unlike her mother, Judy had a moment to react. She fought back. A struggle followed in the darkness. Judy was badly injured, but she survived. The noise and screams woke the two younger children. They began to cry. And at that moment, Harold's actions abruptly stopped. He left the hallway. He did not continue the attack. He did not return to the children's rooms. Harold Perelson went down to the basement of the house. There, he turned to medication, drugs he could easily access as a physician. He swallowed them, and he never came back. When police arrived at the scene, Lillian Perelson was dead in her bedroom. Harold Perelson was found deceased in the basement. Judy was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. The two younger children survived, but were deeply traumatized. In just a few minutes, on a December night, everything Harold Perelson had built over a lifetime collapsed completely. The question that remains is this: what would the survivors be forced to carry with them after that night, when the night of December 6th, 1959, came to an end? The story did not end with the death of Harold Perelson. It entered a different phase, the phase of those who remained alive. Judy Perelson was taken to the hospital in critical condition. She suffered multiple injuries to her head and arms, the marks of a desperate struggle. Doctors were able to save her life, but the damage did not stop at the physical level. That night became an inseparable part of who she would be for the rest of her life. The two younger children were not physically injured, but they woke to screams, to chaos, to a home that was no longer safe. At that age, memory does not need to be complete to cause harm. It only needs to be strong enough to never fade. In the days following the attack, Harold Perelson's children did not remain in Los Angeles. The decision was made quickly and without hesitation. The city was tied to the house. The house was tied to a night that could never be undone. They were taken in by relatives, removed from the Los Feliz neighborhood, from the house on Glendower Place, and from everything that had once defined their lives. Name changes followed, a final severing of the last thread connecting them to the past. In the years that followed, Judy and her siblings lived quietly. They did not appear in the media. They did not tell their story publicly. They did not turn their trauma into spectacle. In an era when shocking stories easily become headlines, their silence stood out, not because there was nothing to say, but because some memories cannot be spoken without bringing them back to life. From a legal standpoint, the case closed quickly. The perpetrator was dead. There was no trial, no verdict. But for the surviving children, nothing was truly resolved. The tragedy did not end at the crime scene. It continued in broken sleep, in lives rebuilt from nothing, yet always carrying a void that could not be filled. And while the survivors left, trying to disappear from the city's memory, one thing remained behind: the house, the place that had witnessed everything. The remaining question is this: what would become of that house? After Harold Perelson's children left Los Angeles, the house on Glendower Place entered a state of emptiness. Nearly everything inside stayed where it had been left on that final night. The Christmas tree still stood in the living room. Carefully wrapped presents remained beneath it, never opened. In the kitchen, the calendar stopped at December 1959, as if no one dared to step forward and turn the page. The house was not immediately sold, and even when it was offered on the market, few people wanted to touch it, not because of its location, not because of its architecture, but because of its history. The property had become permanently associated with a family massacre. In a city where image and reputation carried enormous weight, that kind of history was not easily erased by money. In 1960, the house was purchased by the Enriquez family. They were not people seeking attention. They were an older immigrant family who had built modest wealth through years of labor and careful saving. From a financial perspective, the decision was not irrational. A property of more than 5,000 square feet in Los Feliz was offered at a price well below its true market value. Even by the standards of that era, it was a rare opportunity. But what followed marked a turning point in the house's story. The Enriquez family moved their belongings inside. They used the rooms for storage, yet they never spent a single night there. There was no public statement, no official explanation. The house was kept. Property taxes were paid. The exterior was maintained at a minimal level. Inside, time did not move forward. The belongings of the Perelson family remained. The Enriquez family's possessions were added on top, but nothing was replaced. Two families, two lives, occupying the same space without ever intersecting. Year after year, the house slowly became a time capsule, not through deliberate preservation, but because no one was willing to alter it. Neighbors began to notice. They saw the Enriquez family come and go, carrying items in, carrying items out, but never turning the house into a lived-in home. Whispers followed, a strange feeling when passing by, an unnatural silence surrounding a house that should have been full of life. Stories without confirmation, yet never disappearing. Over time, the house became more than an address. It became a shared memory of the neighborhood, a place people spoke about more quietly than others. A large house, in a location that today would be worth millions of dollars. Yet for decades, no one truly lived inside it. And the question that remains is this: what did the Enriquez family know or experience that kept them bound to that house in silence for so many years without ever speaking of it? As time passed and the house remained unoccupied, the story of Glendower Place began to take on a different form. It was no longer just a crime preserved in police files. It became a shared memory, retold through whispers. By the late 20th century, The first people to enter the house were not journalists or historians. They were urban explorers, drawn to forgotten spaces where time appeared to be suspended. The photographs they took inside spread quickly. Furniture from the 1950s buried under thick layers of dust. Everyday objects left behind, as if the family had only stepped out moments before. The images delivered a powerful visual shock, not because they were gruesome, but because of how ordinary life had been frozen in place. After the images came the stories. Some claimed to see human figures moving along the second-floor hallway. Others reported footsteps echoing through empty rooms. Many described an overwhelming sensation of being watched, as if the house itself retained awareness. These accounts did not emerge all at once. They accumulated slowly. Each retelling added another layer. Each layer pushed the house further away from being seen as an ordinary property. Gradually, Glendower Place earned the label of a haunted house, not through any official declaration, but through repetition, through the persistence of the same unease, reported again and again. Ghost hunting groups took interest. Requests to investigate were sent to the Enriquez family, and all were declined. That refusal did not silence the stories. It amplified them. Ghost tours in Los Angeles began, including the house on their routes. Visitors could only view it from the street. Just an address, a gate, yet enough to summon the entire story. Over time, the boundary between historical fact and supernatural belief grew increasingly blurred. Some believed the house was haunted by the spirits of the victims. Others argued it was the result of collective psychological trauma. When people confront a space marked by extreme violence, the mind seeks meaning to fill the void. There is no scientific evidence confirming supernatural activity in the house, but there is also no way to dismiss the experiences of those who entered and left with the same lingering sensation. And this is where the story turns, because the most important question is no longer whether the house is haunted. It is why, after so many years, this place still refuses to be forgotten. And what happens when a location carrying so much memory is finally forced to face light, life, and human presence once again? In 2016, after more than half a century of silence, the house on Glendower Place was finally sold. The new owners did not choose to tear it down. They did not turn it into a tourist attraction. They made a different decision. They chose to live there. The house underwent a complete renovation. Walls were repaired. Electrical and plumbing systems were replaced. After decades, lights once again turned on in the evenings. People moved through the hallways. The sounds of ordinary life returned to a space that had long been frozen. Before moving in, the new owners invited someone to perform a spiritual ritual, not to banish anything specific, but to acknowledge that this place had witnessed immense loss, a way of speaking to the past before beginning again in the present. From the outside, the house today looks like any other home in Los Angeles, beautiful, quiet, alive. But the story did not disappear. It remains in the memory of the city, in old photographs, in questions that never received complete answers. This story is not only about a crime, it is about ambition, about the pressure to succeed at any cost, about the long silences inside families that appear perfect from the outside. It reminds us that some wounds cannot be seen, that some fears have no name, and that people can hold power, wealth, and status, yet still find no way out for themselves. A house can be repaired, life can return, but memory cannot be erased. And perhaps what makes this house unsettling is not whether it is haunted or not, but the uncomfortable truth it forces us to confront. That tragedy often does not begin with violence. It begins with silence that lasts too long. If you want to continue exploring places shaped by power, loss, and the stories history tends to whisper, the next videos on screen will take you even deeper. Each place, each symbol, reveals something about the era that created it. If this story gave you something to think about, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment to share your thoughts. Thank you for staying until the end, and we will see you again in the next story.